All right.
So good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Chinese Canadian Historical Society of BC. My name is Sarah Ling, and I'm the president, and I'd like to acknowledge that the work of CCHS is done and located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. It's our great honor this evening to be joined by our panelists, John Hogan, Heidi Swierenga, and Lorna Fandrich. I just hear some background audio. I might ask John to help me locate where to mute that. Yeah. But a kind reminder to turn off your background audio for the program. And I just wanted to start by also acknowledging my fellow board members and our general members who are in attendance. And many of you contributed very generously to our community relief fundraiser held throughout last year. So much like all of you, our board was truly devastated to learn about the fire that tore through the Lytton community. And we were really humbled to see our members and the general public rally together and contribute towards our fundraiser. So you can see on the slide here that we were able to raise just over $22,000. And these funds, 100% of them went both towards the Lytton First Nation and the Lytton Chinese History Museum. Over the past several years, we've been really fortunate to make several trips to Lytton on Nch'Lkatmo territory, not only to visit the Chinese History Museum that Lorna spent so many years putting together, but also to visit the last remaining Chinese placer mining sites and to explore that intercultural history between Chinese Canadians and the Nch'Lkatmo people through both river rafting trips as well as bus tours. And so John Hogan, Chief Webster, and Lorna, and many others from the community have been so generous. And that's why we felt the need to do our small part and begin with this fundraiser. But we're very much committed moving forward to looking at other ways to support the recovery of the community, specifically when it comes to cultural heritage. And many of you can attest to the rich history that remains there. And we're really looking forward tonight to hearing about how that recovery has begun and to see the ways in which your contributions and the contributions of many other British Columbians is helping Lytton to recover. And so without further ado, I'd like to invite John Atkin, who is our co-vice president of CCHS, to introduce our panel for tonight.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. It's my great pleasure to have three great participants tonight. And we have Chief John Hogan from Lytton. And I'll just read, I've got some biographies here, and I'll just give you a snapshot of our participants here. So John has committed much of his life to the revitalization of First Nations languages, arts, and culture. He's a valued knowledge keeper within his tribal group, the go-to person for genealogy, history, and place names. He's currently employed as a restorative justice coordinator for the Tribal Council and is playing a key role in the repatriation of ancestral remains to the nation from various institutions. Currently a member of the Stein Valley, and my language skills are lousy, so Nch'Lkatmo Heritage Park Board, the Lytton First Nations Council, and a director of the Anglican Council of Indigenous Peoples. And John's also served as a director for the Fraser Basin Council, the First Nations Alliance for Land Management, and the First Peoples Cultural Council. And on top of all of that, he also volunteers to host a gathering on the 4th of every month to share knowledge, language, protocols, and teachings to help him and others stay connected to who they are. So that's John. We also have Lorna Fandrich, and she's the creator of the Lytton Chinese History Museum, and that was and will be situated on the grounds of a former Chinese Joss house. And the site is recognized by BC and Canadian registers of historic places. And the museum collects, preserves, and displays artifacts and photographs of the vibrant Chinese community that once lived in the region between 1858 and 1928. And in addition to the physical museum, and I think one of the really great resources, given what's happened, is that Lorna spent countless hours building a digital database of the collection. And so the entire collection of over 1,600 pieces were digitized and so made available through the museum's website. And it has already proven to be, in the past and today, a valuable resource for scholars and has drawn interest from around the world. And finally, we have Heidi, again, my language skills, I apologize if I mix this up, but Swierenga, and she's the Senior Conservator and Head of Collections, Care, Management and Access Department at the Museum of Anthropology. And she's a member of the steering group of the British Columbia Heritage Emergency Response Network, BC HERN, and the organization that provides resources and training on emergency response and salvage to galleries, museums, and the archive sector in BC. So those are the folks that we're talking to this evening. And we're focusing on Lytton and the idea of recovery. And because of the society's connection to Lytton, in terms of what Sarah mentioned, in terms of the field trips through both the society and also some of the University of British Columbia programs and the Fraser River gold sites and things, we really wanted to sort of bring everyone up to speed about what's happening, because there has been some very important things that have been happening apart from our fundraiser. A lot of work's been going on in the communities, and so we thought we would bring folks together and talk about Lytton's recovery. So we'll get Heidi to stick her slides up on screen. There we go.
There, I can see.
Yep.
Good.
So do you want to lead off with the slides?
Oh, sorry. No, just a moment. Here you have a preview of the whole presentation.
Oh, excellent.
Well, the three of us were just talking about this experience that we've shared. And I think it's good to start off with the people who are from the community. So I'm going to let John and Lorna speak about the impact of this space to them, and then the fire that happened.
So
Cookstay, Heidi and John and Sarah, thank you all for the work you've done and the work going forward. I appreciate being here, and I'll just introduce myself in Tlakapmachchin. Kishaudkin and Squashed in Tlakapmachkin and Jawa. Dual Ashwin. So I said my name, and I come from my ancestral homeland of Kamchin. And I really never thought I would ever be in a position as to speaking of devastating loss to our community, but that's where we're at. And it goes back to the heat dome we experienced last summer, and the last 3 days of June, we experienced record-breaking temperatures. It was on the third day, the day of the disaster, was 49.6 degrees Celsius. So there was a lot of factors building up to what we now know as that tragic day, and we're 2 people's lives were lost within our community. And so many impacts were made that we lost so many things, including the Chinese History Museum that John has spoken of and the great work of Lorna. But we do know that as you see the confluence here, the Fraser River meeting the Thompson, that is one of the most photographed places in the Fraser Canyon, and it was prior. And a few years back, I believe it was in 2018, we had some MLAs come out to Lytton to erect an apology to the Chinese community for the treatment that was received in the early settlement days of British Columbia. And where the monument sits is still there. It survived the fire. It's overlooking the confluence. And as part of that monument, there's Intlakapamik pictographs, and above there's Chinese writing that was captured approximately 150 years ago by early Chinese miners that were usually in small groups along the Fraser River, and we sort of placed it exactly how it was. And just at the top left of the Fraser, as you see it there, is where that writing on the stone is found within our territory. These 2 rivers are really strategic. They were the early part of opening up of the province, where the Yale Caribou Road was constructed through our territory to get people further upriver into the mining areas of the Caribou and the Barkerville area. So there's been so much that we have to be thankful for. The Chinese Canadian Heritage Society that has done a lot of work fundraising and keeping in contact with people to let them know of our plight. And we know that we are going to recover and rebuild. And prior to the fire, we had a relationship with Heidi's group at the Museum of Anthropology, and Heidi's connected to the BC Heritage. The acronym is BC HERN. She could explain it more, but we had that connection with them prior. We have a partnership between the Ntlakapam Tribal Council in doing an internship program. And I see Sue Rowley's on the Zoom tonight. So it's really good that we have these connections elsewhere. There was so much lost on June 30th. We had many historical buildings, and the St. Mary's and St. Paul's Church, which you saw earlier in a slide, was one of those places that stood through many fires before, but it didn't stand up to June 30th of last year. There was a lot of work done to keep this building revitalized and keep it going into the next few years. A lot of churches were under attack just prior to the fire we had. Many were the targets of arson in BC because of what was discovered in Kamloops in mid-April of 2021. So a young lady came to me about a week before the fire, and she said, "Do you think we should get security to watch over our church?" And we said, "No, it should be okay." We didn't think anything devastating would come out of the heat dome, but we lost this church. And in previous fires, it was a place of refuge for people in the village to go to and muster and things like that. So it stood on this location since about 1871, just prior to the CP rail coming through our territory in 1888, when it met up with the end of the line at Port Moody and then down into Granville, where you now are, and most of you are in Vancouver. So as part of the loss from this building, there was a bell there that was dated to 1875, and the huge stained glass window was a piece of beautiful artwork that was erected in memory of Richard Small, the Archdeacon, in 1937 when the building was retrofitted. But there's just so much. We had a basketry shop on the reserve that was well used, and we also had a huge Intlakapan cedar basket collection in our administration office, which was also lost to the fire. And I had my own personal collection, which was situated in a historical home in the downtown area. So there were several losses on many fronts, and it's just, we're just sort of catching our breath now and being able to do some of the work that we're able to help people return home and relocate to our territory. There's been a lot of work and countless meetings with different agencies, but we want to thank Heidi and others who stepped forward, and many other people have offered assistance to our community, and it's just a hard way to organize all different skills and whatnot, but in some fashion we're going to get there, and it's just going to take a bit longer than a lot of us think. So I'm just going to pause there and let Lorna speak.
Yeah. Thank you. Lorna, what's...
Yeah, first I just would like to thank the Society for putting the fundraising up, and so early. I think that's partly what gave me the confidence to think we could go ahead and rebuild. So I thank all of your donors for that, also for our community and for supporting LFN. So the museum itself, when I began that, I mean, it's a personal project of mine, my baby, I guess. I just wanted to be able to tell the Chinese story of the community, and it didn't seem like anybody else was doing that. And so we began the building in 2016. It opened in 2017. And so I was very happy to be the, well, I call myself the executive director, but I really am the only staff. I am the museum at the moment. And so I was so happy to move ahead and to be able to tell that story. And then just a bit about the day of the fire. I was in the museum, but I left work a little bit early, luckily, or that may have been an issue with me being in the basement there. But on the day of the fire, we were all overwhelmed with just what was happening. But when I was through town, I was mostly just concerned about getting my daughter from her store, which also burned down, and moving on from there. So I didn't think at all really about the museum and what I would lose there. And consequently, both our sons lost their homes also, but Bernie and I did not. But having all that occur, it was still too much of a shock, I'm going to say. But by a couple of days later, then the realization came that our whole community was gone, and all of our services, like our hospital, like our SMP station, a grocery store, all the things that made us the community or allowed us to function from this town. So through all that, and also because we were worried about having our family business, Kamchin Rafting Resort, destroyed. Luckily, it was not. We didn't know that right away, though, so it was all fairly overwhelming. Since then, of course, looking at my database of any of the artifacts, or talking to people, or people donating artifacts to me, I keep going back and saying it was such a good collection. And the two men that collected most of these pieces, over 1,000 of the pieces, they made it their lifetime collection. And I feel particularly sad about losing those. And then the only other thing that I'd like to say before we move on is I think the biggest heartache for me is that I lost a lot of local history there. The Chong family, for example, that were in Lytton from 1883, I think it was, and until in the 2000s, they had donated all kinds of things from their family towards this museum. And I feel particularly sad for items like that I can't replace and I couldn't save for them. And so with that, I think we'll just move on to the next slide. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So Heidi.
I guess this is me.
Yeah.
I also wanted to give my thanks for inviting me here. I think when you told me that Lorna and John were speaking and would I join them, I said, of course I have to. We owe, and by we I mean the BC HERN, we're a group of pretty dedicated volunteers. We owe so much to them for the lessons that we learned working with them on this project. And it really is knowledge that will help us in the work that we will do for the years to come with future emergencies relating to heritage collections. So I just have a couple slides here to let people know what this thing is, the BC HERN. And what it essentially is the big picture is creating a network of people who have training throughout the province, people who are connected to heritage, be them Indigenous community collections, archives, libraries, museums, the whole GLAM sector. What we found through a few events a number of years ago, and I think I have a slide here to show you. So we experienced a couple different emergencies at a few different institutions. This is the Museum of Anthropology, a flood that happened quite unexpectedly. There was a broken, quite a large water main on the road above the museum. And luckily it happened at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So damage was really mitigated because there were so many people there. But it really revealed that there was not a good network of people to call. If we imagined that this had happened at 3 o'clock in the morning and we would have had to have dealt with the salvage of hundreds of important treasures, it would have been quite an ordeal to try to pull together the people with training. So a few of the conservators in Vancouver and the Vancouver Island kind of got together and decided that something needed to be done. So we looked around at different models around the world and decided that we really liked the model that was participation based on moral obligation, people who felt they needed to help and who would be trained in order to provide help on a volunteer basis. And then we spent a little bit of time getting help from people who were very clever at writing grants. And we were able to get our first grant from Canadian Heritage, the museum's assistant program. And what we did with that first grant is we started the foundation for the network, which was a very important first step in bringing together the leaders of the large institutions in BC, those with conservation resources, to sign on to a letter of cooperation saying that emergency response is important and staff within those institutions would be given the time in order to work on it. So that was a few years ago. Now we're pretty pleased with how far we've come. And we focus on a few different things. One of them, as I said, is training. And so we do in-person training workshops. And with COVID, we pivoted to doing virtual workshops, just like everybody else did. Not as fun, but they worked. And the idea is to give people enough experience and information so that two things. One, it will reduce the potential of doing damage in an emergency response situation, but also it will provide you with enough confidence so that you will actually be able to respond in an emergency. And this is just for the information of people who might be interested, is we have just planned out our upcoming 2002 workshop series. So we have one coming up in Prince George in June. Then we're going to go to the Roslin Museum and Discovery Center in September. And then in Vancouver at the MOV, September, October. And more information can be found on our website, as well as a whole bunch of different resources that we're starting to build for people who need to develop their own emergency and disaster plans, as well as just some kind of clever resources to help building your own supply kits. So the all important grab and go bags that we have on our desks, and we're just working on, I think, what will be a really useful set of information sheets on how to do different salvage techniques, how to build a drying tent. And this one here is how to salvage textiles. So we heard about the fire, just like everybody did. And we immediately thought, how can we help? This is the image that was taken across the street from Lorna's museum. This is her son's house, where it was his home. And that's why I'm able to share it with you now. I had no idea that the devastation was as significant as it was. You hear about it, but you don't know until you actually are on site. And it was more than we had ever had experience with. And then really, this is something that John and Lorna can speak to, but we waited and we waited and we waited. And then about 3 months, Lorna, I think it was, I started getting some emails from John saying, are you ready? We might need your help. And it took that long before access to the site was possible. And again, Lorna and John can speak to that, but we in fact thought nothing could be done at that point, but there was so much that could be done. So Lorna, you've already spoken quite a bit about your institution, but here's your beautiful before picture.
Yeah, this is the museum as it was on the site of the previous Joss house. Similarly to what I'd like to reproduce, I guess. And the artifacts inside, there's just no words to describe the devastation to those pieces that you see there. Heidi made a point earlier of saying, notice the jar that's the big jar that's sort of on the right side of that photo. We're going to see that again in some photos. We managed to save that in some form. But most of the items that you see here, fortunately, I have them in my database, and so I haven't lost the history of them. I haven't lost the descriptions of them, and I do have some photo or all the photos of them. So it gives me a good base to begin again. And so that's where we'll go from this example of the museum.
So we're going to tell you the story of the experience that the three of us shared. And by three, I mean one is the BC HERN. There were several volunteers who were there responding, but we're going to tell you that story through these two different sites. And this is the site that we came to. So this is Lorna's museum on the first day that we were there. And this is just a shout out to, you'll see the gray shirt there. This is Team Rubicon Canada, who actually were the organization that allowed us to get into the site. They are much more established, and they have the pathways that are required to get the permits, to get the passes to get into the sites. And they also were quite supportive with helping the BC HERN ramp up their own understanding of what was required in terms of personal protective equipment, PPE, because we were walking into a contaminated site. But you can see here, I think the first feeling is complete gutting because it doesn't look like there's going to be anything that we can do. And I know, Lorna, you were also feeling a bit apprehensive, but we all felt we needed to try.
Yeah, I think initially when we came here, it was the first time I was allowed onto the site also. And I just thought we'd be lucky, if we could save 20 pieces, find something in this rubble that might be worth keeping. So that was pretty disappointing. just coming there and seeing that the devastation.
But then we began, and one of the really important things that really helped us was having Lorna there. So both Lorna and John were the people who were the most intimately familiar with the collections, with the things that would have been of interest on the site, and were able to direct us as to where we should go. And so we worked closely with both of them. We could never have done it without them, or if we had done it, it would have been a much, much different outcome. And the very first thing Lorna did was she brought us a plan, a floor plan of the museum, so that we could see where the stores were for the actual collection versus, for example, where the coffee room was. And the image on the bottom was, Lorna said, don't worry about this stuff. This is replaceable. This is just within the lunchroom. We need to go to the other area. We need to go down. And that was all about making those pathways. And literally making the pathways was the first thing that happened. And it was kind of like a bit of an excavation where you're following the debris and carefully creating a pathway, digging down to make sure they're not damaging anything that might be on that pathway as you work towards those spaces where it's been identified where collections may be found. And through that time, we would have a spotter sitting on or standing on the perimeter, pointing for not only hazards, but where there might be some pieces that were sort of popping out a little bit that should be recovered. And I can't overstate the importance of the PPE. And both John and Lorna also experienced this wonderful thing of being suited up in Tyvek suits that don't breathe very well. We had really cold weather and we had really hot weather. And for the people who are actually down in the site, it was a little bit more. So you had to be taped all in with the heavy duty gloves and the respirators, just because the dust might have asbestos and lead and any of those other things that you don't want to be breathing in. But, after the hot day, someone would take off their boot and literally pour out the water. So it was really, really hard work, but it was very worthwhile. We're going to do a follow this pot story here. And Lorna, if you could speak about these railway pots.
Yeah, well, the strange thing about these railway teapots, some of you will not know them by that name. They're known for that just because near the top there is a little design on there that looks a bit like railway tracks. But initially I'd been reading about these railway teapots from many different sources and thought, oh, I have to make sure I get one of those. And so I did manage to find one. It was very expensive. I thought it was key to the museum at the time. This is very early, the very beginning. When I got those nice collections from the two gentlemen that had 1,000 pieces, I then had 7 of these teapots. But I had no idea that we'd actually be able to save them from this fire. So this was discovering those that was pretty exciting for me. And we'll see more of these teapots as we go along.
So the first one you can see was pulled up out of the corner underneath, protected it from being smashed. And then the process of getting it up out of the foundation of the building, it would be passed on from one person to the other and then carried up a ladder or lifted up into a bucket. And once there, anything was reviewed with Lorna to decide whether or not it would be decontaminated and kept, or whether it would be discarded. And these things would sometimes look as they were, or they'd look completely different. And there was a bit of a criteria. I know on the first day when Lorna was making decisions, there was a lot of hesitancy. Well, I'm not sure if this is good enough to keep. But then by the second day, you were much more sure, and you were making decisions about maybe what you would keep for display versus having in your collection.
Yeah, I think perhaps that's because the first day I thought, we'll be lucky if we get 20 pieces. So even one that was very damaged seemed like it might be worthwhile to keep. As we started to find more pieces that were not intact, but not of their original form, but still better and able to tell the fire story, then I thought we could be more selective about what we kept. There's only so many broken pieces that you need to tell the fire story. And so we watched for a few things in particular, but as we moved along, it was easier to say no to some things.
And then this is it's a sad picture, but it's also a satisfying picture. This is the discard pile. And these are the pieces that Lorna has decided that she's going to let go because they're in too poor of condition. And then it was a trick for us to remember not to salvage them again. We had to kind of mark it off. No, don't pick these up again. And then begins the process. So these are 3 of the pots. I'm trying to remember if there was 4 in the end that came up successfully. And then there was a 5th, but it was quite damaged. But then comes the decontamination process and the cleaning process. So the debris we know may be hazardous. So we start the process by making sure it's brushed off. And the wind on the site was quite significant in one day. So you have to be conscious of which way the wind is blowing for sure. And then it would go through a series of wash baths, wash, rinse, and then drying. And again, the wind was blowing like crazy. So we had to keep changing our idea on how to dry things out without having all of the pieces blow away again. And all through that, it was really important to document the collection, document the pieces, but also the process that we were going through. And sometimes that's important just so that you can keep track of what's happening on a day-to-day basis. But also for many, this is information that might be really important for the insurance companies that are holding their policies because they want that detailed information. And this picture just reminds me of a great story. The pot that's right in the foreground, is it a teapot, Lorna, the green pot?
It is, yeah.
The teapot. So it has that little lid, that circular lid. And I found that one morning. I was down in the site and I held up this little lid and I thought, well, it's got no rest of the pot. I can't imagine Lorna's going to keep this, but I put it up in the basket and I sent it up. And then that afternoon, I found the bottom of the pot and both of them were in perfect condition. And it was just such a wonderful feeling because I could have easily have discarded that top, but it kind of highlighted how important it was not to make rash decisions on the spot. And there was another really amazing, beautiful example, a small pottery shard, and it was a white porcelain piece. And it was just a little fragment. And on that fragment, there was the most beautiful blue flower pattern. And I, again, thought that, well, nobody's going to keep this, but it's such a beautiful blue flower. I'm going to send it up. And then found out later that it was actually an important pattern. And that Lorna was quite happy that it had been found. And this is just to show an example of some of the crazy things we did. This is a pot that has a large unstable crack all the way through it. So this is the elastic bungee that's put a headlamp around your head. And it's to make use of the tools and resources that are available to you. And so somebody lost their headlamp, but the pot is now integrated and safe. And then this is a really important part of the process wherein it doesn't end when things are documented and on a table. What are you going to do with all of those things? So it was really important that things be carefully packed because we have to assume that these are going to be in storage for quite a long time and you don't want further damage to happen to those things. In terms of our record keeping, we were documenting for Lorna the location from which those pieces came. And then hopefully that information could go back to cross-referencing her own catalog record. And then this is for you, Lorna, speaking about your hopes for recovery.
Yeah, this is a rendition that's been done by a Chinese architect from Vancouver that's planning to work with me in the future. We're basically trying to keep the building the same as it was. we're waiting for the village to determine what the bylaws would be for the new building code. When that happens, and I'm hoping we can quickly move ahead with it. There will be a few changes, of course, to make it more fire smart, I guess. For example, it had Deroid shingles, so it'll probably have a metal roof now. But overall, we're trying to keep the same look as we had there. It will be the same size, kind of a maximum size for the lot. But the important part of that to me was the main part of the building that you see with the peaked roof. That was the size of the original Joss house. And so it's my desire to maintain that size. The back addition to the building, you know, was more the kitchen and the washings, those kind of thing. But it's important for me to keep that size in the front true to what the Joss house was originally. So just one last thing, I guess my hope is that we'll be able to move on and start rebuilding by fall. As John will say, that's still quite unsure, but that's what we're hoping for. And then Heidi put this slide in, which is many organizations have donated money to me, but also many people are now calling to say they have Chinese artifacts, which I'd be welcome to. This is a small grouping of a set of a collection that the Yuan on Lung store in Merritt, which was operated by the Toy family from 1928, I think it was, until really in the 60s, but they closed the doors and stayed in that building till about 2000. So the people that own that store now have tucked away quite a few pieces like this that they plan to give me in the future. So all of those things give me hope that we can actually move ahead and have a similar quality museum to what I had before. You know, there have been many people offering to donate, and I think we'll be able to do that.
Yeah, so we're not probably going to recreate the church as it was prior, but the Lytton First Nation will have some type of cultural, spiritual building that will replace St. Mary's and St. Paul's. And we weren't as fortunate as Lorna to recover a lot of items. The fire there burnt really hot, and so it even shattered the bill. We do have some remnants of the bill, and as part of the church property, there were a lot of Anglican plates. Our church may have had the distinction of owning the largest Anglican plate collection in BC, and if not in BC, maybe even in Canada. We had Anglican plates from across Canada and in England. So, and this is the back of one plate that was from the Blood Reserve in Alberta. And we had put these plates on display when there was special anniversaries in the community, like the 100th anniversary of a certain building. And that's the church that's a village proper, St. Barnabas. It's celebrating 100 years this year. So we don't have access to that building, but we're trying to incorporate some signage that recognizes the anniversary of the building, and then there's no hydro or water to that parish property. We do have a rectory there as well, and the parish hall survived. And I see Krista Hansen's on the Zoom, and the Chief Shukpintlam Park has gotten some funding to increase the signage and the interpretation of the area. So that is in the works, and we're trying to move forward with that and do a lot of the necessary meetings to have those. And the stained glass in this picture came from the 1937 memorial window to Archdeacon Small. we did have a lot of people reach out to us and ask if they could have a piece of that stained glass as a memento from their memories of the church. So we're not sure when we can accommodate that, but we're going to see if we could pass some of this glass on to those that are interested. This is on the site as well, and decontaminating the glass. Much of the glass was lead glass, and there was some asbestos in the building, so that is keeping the volunteers safe and decontaminating a lot of the items.
So I have just a few quick slides to show you now, just some interesting things that happen to the collections after the fire. This is a kind of a brilliant before and after of one of the pots in Lorna's collection, her catalog record photograph. And then essentially what has happened is the pot has been fired again and it's been overfired. So the glaze has now become something different. The pot is a little bit lighter now, and the glaze is a little bit, well, quite a lot more porous. It's still there, but it's a much different pot. And this was a really fascinating thing that I found. What's happening here, this is on one of the railway teapots, and that mass that's over top of it is a melted glass display shelf. And our first thought was, well, it's ruined. But if you find the right spot and you tap it with a hammer, it pops right off, because the melting temperature of the glass is significantly lower than the tin glaze on the pot. And underneath, the pot was perfect. For other things, the fire and the heat of the fire maybe didn't impact the glaze so much, but the heat was so strong, it caused the body of the ceramic to slump a bit. This is porcelain. Porcelain requires a very high temperature to fire, and it's been high enough so that this bowl is now no longer round. It's a bit wonked. And this was a piece that Lorna allowed me to keep, and I have it sitting at my desk at work, and every day it actually brings me joy, because it's a very happy memory of what happened here after a very sad event. Even things that you think would be absolutely destroyed in a fire, sometimes evidence remains. So the basket base, it's now heavily carbonized. You can't handle it very well, but you can see the woven structure. You can still understand the way it was made, and that in itself is important information. So a photograph in this case becomes important. And this is on the right, a great image we like to share with people who have collections and document their collections, because that unique identifying number that you have associated with something, catalog number, accession number, painted on the bottom with nail polish and black pen, that may not last through the fire, may not survive. So one pot has the number still on it and it's actually in a bit worse shape. The other one that's in better condition, the number is completely gone. So you've lost that connection with the record and the information that you might have had with that piece. You might not know what family it came from anymore. And this came from the church site, and it's I think these are the song books. John can correct me, they're right at the front, but you can't even breathe on it. It's just a fragment. It's complete ash, but you can tell it was a book. And then this is that pot that was in the center of Lorna's display case. And this was one of the last things that we were able to bring out of the site. And it had been protected under a tree right at the edge. And it's almost in perfect condition. There's a bit of scratching on it, but the glaze is maybe darker, a little bit of different color, but it's still shiny and otherwise great. And the fire will return things back to its original state. That man was just a piece of bisqueware, and the paint is gone, but he himself is still strong. And that's all we have for you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We do have a few questions that have popped up in the chat. Before we get, well, based on one of the questions, I guess a question to John, though. You mentioned off the top the loss of the basket and weaving collections. And I guess, in one sense, what does that mean to the community to lose something like that? And then is there a way to not recreate, but is there another source of baskets, or what does that mean to the whole nation, I guess?
Well, the loss of the baskets is huge because you're losing connections to artwork, and then you're losing connections to family members. Each basket maker had distinctive patterns, and many of them had unique styles that they created a basket. And so that's huge. The saving grace and all of that is there are huge basketry collections in institutions worldwide that were collected from Inflicup territory. James Tate in the early, about 120 years ago, he was collecting a lot of baskets and sending them off to various institutions. We're glad where Heidi and Sue work at the UBC Museum of Anthropology. There's huge collections. People have reached out to us after the story that was done by around the baskets, and people have generously said they would repatriate baskets to our community.
Oh, okay.
Lumberton Museum is one, and then we've got an offer from a lady in Maple Bay. She returned a basket that her mother collected in Lytton in 1932.
Mhm.
So it's happening, and the trick is we don't have a place to store them right now. We don't, so
Right.
it's to wait and then work through that later.
Right. So that must be gratifying in one sense, that people are actually willing to give back artifacts. And does that then open up a further discussion with institutions that have collected artifacts in the past, that they might be more willing to sort of bring
Yeah.
things back to the community?
Prior to the fire, RBCM was in the early stages of working with communities to do things like that, because they're going to do a little shift up in some of the work that they're doing there, and how to give main items back to communities where they would be interpreted in a different way and
Mhm.
have meaning to the community.
Yeah. And then I guess the thought then too is, I mean, the fire has been described as sort of a once in a lifetime event, but I guess there's always the question of how do you build to try to protect, I guess, for the future?
Yeah, I'm just on my commute this afternoon. They were saying that the weather next August and September is going to be much similar to what we had in June. So we always have to be prepared,
Right.
and do some of the work that Heidi mentioned about being more resistant and resilient to disasters that could overtake buildings of significance and
Yeah.
like that.
And Lorna, there was a question just straight off. Somebody was just curious to know, what were the personal reasons for you to start the museum?
Well, we bought the lot with the original Joss House site in the early 80s. And we were actually parking our river rafts on that lot at that time. And then a local person came and told us that there had been a Chinese Joss House on the site and brought in a newspaper article showing us that. So I researched that, and sure enough, that was true.
Mhm.
However, we didn't do anything with the lot. And all these years, I mean, from 1980s until now, I thought somebody should do something in our community to remember that the Chinese people were here and that there was this temple. And so I guess after probably about 2013, I was getting closer to retirement age from our family business.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I keep telling everybody they should start it, so why don't I? So as a sole proprietor, I just decided to go ahead and do the building and form the museum, because I felt passionate about the whole subject, but also with what I was doing there. So that carried me through to doing all of it. And so that's what I hope to continue with. I still feel that same passion to tell the story. And yeah, that's how it all started. Of course, most Chinese people in particular, when they come in the door, are quite surprised to see this little Caucasian lady standing there. They're wondering why I did it. But I think once they talk to me and realize I am passionate about it, then it's all fine.
Excellent. So there was some of the recovered artifacts are obviously have been through the fire and are damaged. But obviously there would be some in the new museum, a recall of the fire in the event. So I guess there's a bit of a plan to frame some artifacts as here's what survived the fire and explain the fire that way.
Yeah,
What's the approach that you're thinking
I think
of?
that will be easily done. I don't want to have it overcome the story in the museum, but for sure I'll have a display there of what's happened, basically to the product, how it changed. Luckily, and the one thing I wanted to say to every person, every museum, look after your digital collection, because even if I have an item there, like one of the little pots that's been pretty much destroyed, to have the photo there of what it was like or its history is going to be really important in telling the story.
Yeah.
In my museum, it's slightly different because many of the items were from the Lytton Ashcroft area. But in telling the story, it wasn't, except for the Chong family artifacts and a few others, it wasn't telling the story of an actual Chinese family in Lytton. So that's why I believe getting artifacts that are similar from other communities, they'll have their own story, but they can also still tell the Lytton story.
Right.
So that's the direction I hope.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I must say, personally, when we got news of the fire, that was the first thing everybody thought was, oh my goodness, where's the digital record? Hopefully it's not in the basement of the museum. And I think that was one of the huge sighs of relief when we heard that, the server and stuff was offsite and protected and that survived, because it is such an incredibly valuable record. And I know so many, I visit as part of what I do. I visit people's collections sometimes for things, and I'm always asking, how is this documented? Oh, I know everything in the room. And it's like, but have you documented it? And, the potential for disaster. And so I think that's what makes the digital record so valuable, that it exists.
Yeah, perhaps, perhaps my one regret is that I didn't have many photos or great photos of each item, because I received them all in such a short span. I was just taking one photo of everything with my phone to record what it was and who it was from. So it didn't have the time to go back and take, the excellent photos of each item. So that's another thing I guess I would encourage museums to do is right from the get-go, if you have the time to do that production.
Yeah. We have a question that's asking, we have your museum, but do you have any news on just the Litton Museum itself?
Yeah, I'm in touch with Richard. I'm in touch with Richard Forrest, the director of the other museum. Of course, it was burned down.
Yeah.
I feel very dismayed about that, because there was so much history, so much direct local history in that museum. And it had been going sort of full force since 1980, I believe.
Hmm.
And so they weren't able to find, maybe 20, 25 artifacts. Heidi was part of that too, but almost nothing that was of value. They went back in sifting twice. And so now they're in a waiting game also, because the building was owned by the village, and the museum is an extension of the village. And so they're waiting to see what will happen with rebuilding. But like John, they are now getting people getting in touch with them saying, oh, we have, grandma's journal, which talks about her life, and would you like to have it? So people are stepping up. Perhaps they never thought of that before, but because they know we've lost everything, they're stepping up saying my item might be important.
Right. Okay.
I have hopes for that.
Yes. No, and I think that's, well, this is a good thing. It is that awareness of what you have and how important it might be to others. Heidi, there's a question, and I was going to ask it anyway, but there is a question. What, I guess, now that you've had this experience with both the church and the Litton museums, are there lessons that the group has learned from this? And are there things that you might do differently? Or is this preparing, have you learned stuff that for the next time when you have to head out and do something?
Yeah, as I said, this was an incredibly valuable experience for us because of what it taught us. And it wasn't just about how to work on a contaminated site, but it really enforced for us something we knew, which is how important it is for response to be done along with the keepers of the collection, those who know the collections well. So whenever that can happen, it does make all of the difference. Imagining how we would have done it without Lorna and John there to make decisions on the site is quite difficult. We would have probably come to a whole bunch of assumptions that would have been incorrect. But these experiences, as well as the other smaller localized emergencies that each one of us have been involved with in our different institutions, or the smaller institutions that are the larger institution support, have all fed into the learning process. And with each experience, we by our training programs, and we modify our information resources that we create, because you're building on knowledge with every single event. Right.
So maybe you can't answer this, but I'm just curious, has this, I guess, the experience of both with the church and the rest of the cultural artifacts with the Lytton Nation, and then the two museums in Lytton, has this sort of made other institutions in the province, smaller ones that might have not thought about disaster and recovery, has that kind of awakened something with folks? Is there a greater awareness by any chance?
I would say yes. The true tragedy is that emergency planning is something that every institution knows they need to do, but it's very challenging to fit it into the priorities and the work plans of a very busy institution, whether it's run by a volunteer or there's a core of 50 staff.
Yeah, it's
usually stretched pretty thin. And it's like all of us at home preparing for the next earthquake. We know we should do it, but it hasn't happened yet. So we're going to do this other thing instead. Yeah. And it's a lot of crossing your fingers. And I think all of the BC HERN members would probably be able to say that they are very much on top of the emergency planning and drilling within their own institutions, because they've seen what can happen. Right. So they've experienced that earthquake, so to speak. It's real. It's really real. And the whole issues around climate change, we see these things happening all around the world, but this is really close to home, and it was home, right?
Yeah.
So it's become, I think, a lot more real for a lot of different people. And even within the province, I know that the BC Museums Association has really focused on emergency preparedness and response and support for their members, because they also think that it's a significant issue that maybe has been dormant for a bit, but
Mhm.
now is the time for people to prepare.
Yeah, because I think of here in Vancouver, two of our local institutions right on the shoreline of English Bay, and with sea level rise, and I know one of them already has slightly damp basements, so that sort of thing is necessary. We have Mary with a raised hand, so I'm going to unmute. Or I'll get her to unmute herself. I can't do that. Sarah, can you unmute her by any chance?
It looks like she's ready to go. Mary, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
I'm a person who has 3 generations of forebears born and raised in Lytton. I also have the very first piano that was brought to Lytton. And I'm wondering if there's any place in your restoration for me to donate that. This piano was ordered from the Heinzman factory by Barbara Brophy, who had built, she and her husband had built the Brophy Hotel, later the Totem Motel. And I'd be very pleased to make a donation of this Heinzman piano. If you can tell me where would be suitable, who should I contact?
Perhaps I can help with that.
Yeah.
I think if you can somehow get your information to me at just Lorna at Lytton Chinese History Museum, I can contact Richard Forrest and get in touch with you, because from the Brophy house, there were so many things in the other museum from that family that were lost.
Yes.
And I think Richard would be the one to make the decision. I'm sure he won't be able to accept it for a while, just because we don't know what's happening with the building. But yeah. I could pass on your information to him. That would be wonderful.
Thank you. I will do that.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for that question. And let's see. No. So we're coming up just 1/4 after. So final words from each of you. I'd like to just to wrap things up. So John, some final thoughts or words?
Sure. I just want to thank each of you for attending tonight, and I want to give special recognition to Laurie Chong, Adrian Fairburn, and Brad and Jeff Chong, and Bonnie Campbell, Imogen Lim, some of the people I know on the call. I just thank each and every one of you for thinking about us and knowing some of the struggles that we're going through, but I do know that we are going to try to come back much better, and Lytton's been our home for many years, and I'm glad the lady mentioned the piano from the Brophy house. I do know the buildings that Mrs. Brophy's son-in-law had built in the community as well. And my nephew owned the house that her relative would have built, and the old post office building. So I do really appreciate all of the offers that are coming in from other places to repatriate and share items with our community, because it only will make us better in the future. And again, I want to thank Sarah and John for the work they did tonight. And I know the museum that Sarah's working with in the Pender Street location is very beautiful, and I hope each of you get a chance to see that location as well and provide your thoughts and input into the work they're doing there as well, because I think they're going to have some beautiful things going forward to share with the world as well. So thank you all for listening to us. Homa.
Thank you. That's great. And Lorna, some
And
final.
for me, likewise, I'd just like to thank all of you for tuning in tonight with us, particularly also to Sarah and John, and for Rob Ho also for contacting me all along in this journey to try to help us out. Obviously for the collection of the funds that you've done for us. I'd also like to really thank Heidi. Without Heidi, I don't think we would have been able to salvage any items. Rubicon was helpful to us, but at the time they were going into most houses for 1 hour, 15 minutes or so. And you would say what you thought you would find in one corner of the lot, and they went and looked for it, and that was it. So having the reputation, the team from Heidi's group made the big difference in us being able to actually even get access to the lot, let alone having bodies in there to find the pieces that we were able to get. And so for the community at large, I am so grateful because I have been receiving a lot of donations and support to keep the museum going ahead. And even though I'm getting a little older, I will continue to do that. Hopefully we get to build it in the next year or two though. But thank you all for attending tonight also.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Heidi, some final thoughts.
Yeah, again, I give my thoughts, and I just wanted to give a big shout out to all of the institutions that have supported the BC HERN and all of the volunteers who work. So I have the privilege to speak with you this evening, and thank you so much for listening. But really, I think there were 2 teams of 6 and 7 people who came, and they came from the Vancouver Art Gallery, they came from the Museum of Anthropology, they came from the Kelowna Museums, and others that I am forgetting, also conservators working in private practice. So it was a significant, the acknowledgement by these institutions and the people who are working within these institutions that this is an important thing to do is critical. And without that support, we wouldn't be able to do the work. So yeah, big thanks to everybody.
Oh, it's been fantastic. It's been a really great chance just to hear from all of you, because it's such a surprising and shocking event. And yet there's a little glimmer of hope that comes out the end. And it's really interesting to see the work that's been done on by everybody. I do want to remind you that we, the Chinese Canadian Historical Society, we're still happy to take donations for both the Lytton Band and the Chinese Museum in Lytton. And we've been very pleased and honored that our members and the general public have supported that fundraising in the past. And so we'll just remind you that we're still happy to take those donations, and 100% of that heads off to the parties. So if you're interested, our website is just the CCHSBC.ca, and check out our website, and there's always a donate here button on our website. And I think, Sarah, anything else to add?
We do want to share our next event, and there's a special tie-in. And so I'll set you up, John, but you're welcome
All right.
to make the news.
That's
But
right.
we are going to announce our annual honoree. As many of you know who have been loyal supporters, we do recognize a Chinese Canadian who has made significant contributions to our history and the documentation of our shared experiences. And so you are the very first batch of people to learn this public announcement. Of course, during the pandemic, we haven't been able to do our annual dinner, which is traditionally held in Vancouver, Chinatown, but we are going to resume a similar event this year, but not in Vancouver. So I'll keep you in suspense as we pull up the slide.
There we go.
But here we go, a familiar face to many of you.
Yeah.
And I think John Hogan will be happy to see this.
Yeah, so we we are very, very thrilled to do our first, I guess, small banquet. We're going to be in Victoria. We're going to be at Golden City, the restaurant, and we're going to be honoring Lily Chow for her extraordinary work over the years of documenting Chinese Canadian history. So it's Saturday, June 18th in Victoria, and it's a celebration lunch. And Lily is sort of one of those people that just never knows when to stop. And just an extraordinary personality and an amazing researcher. Chinese Canadian Historical Society, we have her blood, sweat on the Over the Railway Tracks as one of the books that we sell off of our website. And it's a really great book because it's actually telling the building of the railway from the Chinese perspective instead of the other narrative. And so it's that other history. And Lily does an extraordinary job of capturing that. And she was, now is it Order of Canada or Order of BC, Sarah?
Yes, she was appointed to the Order of Canada, and that was just this past January. So a major accomplishment. And I believe she turned 90 or 91, John.
Yeah.
So quite incredible to see her still working hard. She's actually releasing a new publication, I think this coming June. So it's amazing to see her still very passionate. This will be a history on the Chinese and the Kootenays, but I think she's the oldest author that I know.
She's not the Lily on the call, is she?
Lily is not on this call, no.
No.
But I do have a photo that that includes John, and maybe you want to speak to that, John H.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. There's myself holding the microphone. I'm a little bit thinner now, but next to me is David Chong, and we just attended his celebration of life at the beginning of the month. And Lily, and I believe that's George Chow with her unveiling the memorial. So as part of Lily's speech that day, she says she loves Lytton, and I think those words are still true. So she's done a lot of work through Indigenous communities as well, and spoken to a lot of people throughout the province. So very honored to know her, and very glad that she received the Order of Canada.
May I just add one thing also?
Please.
So Lily has been the mentor for me and my museum all along. I first met her at a Kuan Yin ceremony on the empty Joss House lot, and we attended a luncheon after, and I mentioned to her that I just might be thinking of doing a museum on that site, and so she got all excited about that. Then I didn't meet her again for a couple of years, and she was part of the committee that selected that site as a historic site. And then since then, she's been my mentor. And I'd like to say she's not so knowledgeable, but when I have questions about whether I should display something or not, I contact Lily, and she's a good friend. So I know she'll be totally honest with me about whether it should actually be there or not. So I'm very, very pleased to see this, and I really hope I can attend.
Oh, we
Thank
look
you for
forward to
doing
that. Yeah.
Yes, and Lily has personally mentioned she would love to see all three panelists there. So that's a little hint. But whatever we can do to get you over there, let John and I know. And I did want to mention that her current publication that was published by CCHS, we are going to donate all proceeds that come in to that. It's an actual reprint because we sold out quite some time ago. And I can see Larry Chin, our board member, holding up a copy. But if you do need that book, proceeds will go back to Lytton as part of that connection and Lily's contributions.
Yeah. So mark the date in your calendar, and we're looking forward to actually having an in-person banquet and an in-person honoree. And there's Larry with his book. And so yeah, hopefully we'll see you in Victoria. And I think that wraps up our evening. So I'd like to thank everybody that attended. Really nice to quote, see, unquote, everybody tonight. And thank you so much again to John and Lorna and to Heidi. It's been really a really great evening. I've really enjoyed it. So thank you so much for taking the time with us. And thanks everybody for joining us. And we'll see you again at another event. And we're hopefully coasting to outside of June. Hopefully we'll see you more in person at some of our things. So thank you so much. So good night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
All
Good
right.
timing.
Yeah. All right. Good night.
Thanks again. Good night, all.
Yeah. Thanks, John.
Thank
That
you,
was
John.
great.
Great to see you.
You too.
Just wanted to say thanks and good night.
Okay.
Take
Thank you.
care.
Thank
That
you,
was
Heidi. It's
great.
really nice to work with you.
You too. It was such a
Yeah.
pleasure.
Yeah, we'll be in touch for sure.
Have a good
Great.
night.
Thanks.
Close it now?
Just gonna save the chat, John,
Leave it.
Oh, okay.
and you'll get the video.